The desert wind whispered across the endless expanse of sand and sage as Samuel Morrison guided his covered wagon toward the distant mountains. His weathered hands held the reins with the gentle confidence that comes from 40 years of working the land and 40 years of learning that kindness often matters more than strength. The sun hung low, painting everything in shades of amber and gold when he first spotted the figure huddled beside the old cottonwood tree. At first Samuel thought it might be a bundle of rags left by some passing traveler, but as his wagon drew closer he realized it was a woman wrapped in what appeared to be a tattered blanket. Her long hair hung loose and unkempt around shoulders that shook with each labored breath. Samuel brought his team to a gentle halt and climbed down slowly, his boots crunching softly on the desert floor. He had learned long ago that sudden movements could frighten folks who were already scared, and this woman looked more frightened than anyone he had ever seen. As he approached, she lifted her head and Samuel saw eyes that held more pain than any person should have to carry. Those eyes were the pale blue of winter sky, and they seemed to look right through him as if she was seeing something terrible that only she could see. Samuel stopped several feet away and removed his hat the way his mother had taught him when he was just a boy. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice carrying the warmth of Sunday morning coffee and fresh baked bread. "Mom, I don't mean you any harm." The woman pressed herself back against the tree trunk as if she could somehow disappear into its bark. Her hands clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and Samuel could see now that beneath the fabric her arms and face bore the marks of someone who had endured more than their share of hardship. "Don't touch me," she whispered, at first so quietly that Samuel had to strain to hear. Then louder and with a desperation that made his heart ache, she screamed the words. "Don't touch me." Samuel raised both hands slowly, showing her his empty palms. "I won't touch you," he said with the same gentle tone he used to calm spooked horses. "I promise you that. My name is Samuel Morrison and I have a ranch about 10 miles west of here. I was just heading home after picking up supplies in town." He gestured toward his wagon where bags of flour and sugar and coffee beans lay covered by canvas. The woman stared at him with those haunted eyes, and Samuel could see that she was trying to decide whether to trust him or to run. He had seen that same look in the eyes of wild mustangs that had been mistreated by men who thought power mattered more than patience. Samuel slowly reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. His wife Martha had packed him sandwiches that morning the way she had every time he went to town for the past 23 years. He unwrapped one of the sandwiches and placed it on the ground between himself and the woman, then stepped back several paces. "I imagine you might be hungry," he said. "My wife Martha makes the best bread in 3 counties and she always packs more food than any one person could eat." The woman stared at the sandwich as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. Samuel could see her hands trembling and he suspected she hadn't eaten in quite some time. "Go ahead," he said gently. "It's yours." The woman looked from the sandwich to Samuel and back again. After what seemed like an eternity, she reached out with one shaking hand and snatched the food, pulling it quickly back against her chest. Samuel watched as she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who had known too many days without food. When she finished, he unwrapped another sandwich and placed it beside the first spot. The woman took this one too, though not quite as frantically as the first. While she ate, Samuel talked in the same quiet voice he used when gentling horses. "I built my ranch with my own hands," he said. "Took me near 15 years to get it running proper. My Martha, she came out from St. Louis to be a schoolteacher and ended up marrying a stubborn rancher instead. She says she got the better end of that bargain, though I suspect she was just being kind." The woman listened as she ate, and Samuel could see some of the tension leaving her shoulders. He continued talking about his life, his ranch, the cattle that somehow always found new ways to get into trouble. He talked about Martha and her garden where she grew vegetables and flowers with equal skill. He talked about the small adobe house they had built together, room by room, as their life together grew. As the sun sank lower in the sky, Samuel noticed that the woman had stopped eating and was listening intently to his words. The fear in her eyes had not disappeared, but it had been joined by something else. Something that might have been hope. "Mom," he said eventually. "I know you don't know me from Adam, and I know you got good reason to be scared of strangers. But night comes hard in the desert and it gets cold enough to freeze water in a tin cup." He gestured toward his wagon. "I got blankets and supplies, and my ranch house has a room where you could rest safe if you wanted. No one would bother you there. Martha would see to that. She has a way of making folks feel welcome without making them feel crowded, if you know what I mean." The woman stared at him for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me?" Samuel considered the question carefully. The way he had been taught to consider all important questions. Because he said simply, "It's the right thing to do. My pa used to say that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but the world judges us by our actions. And my Martha, she always says that kindness is the only thing that multiplies when you give it away." The woman looked down at her hands. "What if I am not a good person?" she asked. Samuel shook his head slowly. "Mom, I have been alive for 57 years and I have learned that good people are the ones who worry about whether they are good people. Bad folks generally don't spend much time on that particular question." The desert wind picked up, then carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Samuel could see storm clouds gathering on the horizon and he knew they needed to get moving soon. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "But I am heading home and you are welcome to ride along. If you change your mind at any point, I will stop the wagon and let you out wherever you want. No questions asked." The woman studied his face as if searching for some sign of deception. Samuel waited patiently, the way he had learned to wait for frightened animals to make their own choices. Finally she nodded once. "All right," she whispered. Samuel smiled, then not too broadly but with genuine warmth. He walked slowly to his wagon and arranged the supplies to make a comfortable space among the bags and boxes. Then he climbed onto the driver's seat and waited. The woman stood slowly, gathering the blanket around her shoulders. She walked to the wagon with careful, measured steps, and Samuel could see that each movement cost her effort. When she reached the back of the wagon, she hesitated again. Samuel kept his eyes forward, giving her the privacy of her own decision. After a moment he heard the soft sound of someone climbing into the wagon bed. He waited until he heard her settle among the supplies before making a soft clicking sound to his horses. The wagon began to roll forward at an easy pace designed more for comfort than speed. As they traveled, Samuel continued to talk occasionally about simple things. The weather, the landscape, the way the mountains looked different depending on the time of day. He did not ask her any questions. He did not try to make her talk. He simply offered the gift of human conversation without expecting anything in return. When they finally reached his ranch, the sun had disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and rose. Martha came out onto the porch as soon as she heard the wagon wheels. She took one look at the woman in the wagon bed and without asking a single question walked over to help her down. Samuel watched as his wife guided their unexpected guest toward the house, speaking in the same gentle tone she used with injured birds. Inside the warm glow of lamplight, Martha prepared a room and drew a bath and laid out clean clothes. She did all of this with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that sometimes actions speak louder than questions. Later that evening, as Samuel sat on his porch smoking his pipe, he reflected on the strange day. Inside the house he could hear the soft murmur of women's voices, and he smiled to think that Martha had already begun the slow work of healing that seemed to come as naturally to her as breathing. The woman would stay with them for as long as she needed. That much Samuel knew without having to discuss it with Martha. They would ask no questions about her past and make no demands about her future. They would simply offer what they had always offered to those who needed it. A safe place to rest. A warm meal. The quiet comfort of human kindness. And perhaps most importantly, the understanding that everyone deserves a second chance to find their way home. Samuel knocked the ashes from his pipe and looked up at the stars that had begun to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring whatever tomorrow would bring. But tonight there was one less person in the world who had to face the darkness alone. And for Samuel Morrison that was enough.